Hi, how's it going everyone? So if you have been doing some research into investing, I'm sure you would have heard of Vanguard ETFs. And I'm sure you would have heard that they are pretty good value with good returns and low fees. However, with more than 70 different ETFs to choose from, it can be quite overwhelming. In this video, I'll be going over 5 of the best Vanguard ETFs that you can invest in through your stockbroker for a passive investment to gain massive profits. If this type of content is useful to you, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel. So let's get into it. First off, what exactly is an ETF? ETF stands for Exchange Traded Funds. They're basically a collection of investment products such as stocks or bonds that are packaged together into one basket. They often track a particular index such as the S&P 500 or specific industries like energy or consumer staples. So when you buy an ETF, you are essentially buying many companies in one go. This is good because it helps you diversify and spread out the risk. Vanguard is the world's second largest fund manager with more than $6 trillion under their management. It also has a very unique business model in that it is owned by its funds, and its funds are owned by the shareholders that invest in the funds, which essentially is you and me who purchase the funds. They don't have any outside investors that they need to make money for. So this model allows them to maximize profits for people that actually invest in their funds, mainly by lowering the fees. Unlike many active fund managers, which would charge more if the fund is doing well, Vanguard aims to reduce their fees when their fund is doing well. In fact, their fees are lower today than when the fund was first launched back in the 1970s. Now let's take a look at the 5 best Vanguard ETFs in no particular order. First up, we have the Vanguard S&P 500 ETF with the symbol VOO. VOO tracks the S&P 500 index in the US, which is a weighted index of the top 500 companies in the US. Despite it being one of the most popular, it is actually not one of Vanguard's oldest ETFs, and it was first launched in 2010. Now let's take a look at the fees associated with VOO. VOO has an expense ratio of 0.03%, which means that if you invest in $10,000 in the fund, you are only charged $3 fee. Now, 0.03% is the lowest out of all of the Vanguard funds, and it is also one of the lowest out of all the ETFs in existence. VOO has a dividend yield of 1.88%, so you do get some dividends that comes along with the particular ETF. Now let's take a look at the holdings of VOO. VOO has a total of 510 different stocks. And if we look at the sector distribution, we can see that information technology has 27.5%, followed by healthcare, consumer discretionary, communication services, and financials. Its top holdings include Microsoft, Apple, and Amazon. The chart of VOO basically looks like the chart of the US S&P 500 index. And over the past 5 years, VOO has returned around 53.35%. Next up, we have the Vanguard Growth ETF with the symbol VUG. VUG tracks the US Large Cap Growth Index, and it gives exposure to the largest growth companies in the US, including Microsoft, Apple, Amazon, and Tesla. This ETF was launched in 2004, so it's actually older than the Vanguard S&P 500 ETF. So now let's take a look at the fees and what's in the ETF. The Vanguard Growth Index Fund ETF, VUG, has an expense ratio of 0.04%, which makes it slightly higher than the Vanguard S&P 500 fund. It also has a yield of 0.85%. And because it's so tech-heavy, it has less of a dividend compared to the S&P 500 fund. So let's have a look at what it's actually in this particular fund. VUG has a total of 270 stocks in the ETF, and most of it is concentrated in the technology sector, with more than 40% of them from the technology sector. And secondly, we have consumer services, financials, and different industrials. The largest holding in VUG include Microsoft, Apple, and Amazon. So it's pretty similar to the Vanguard S&P 500 ETF. Let's have a look at the charts for VUG. VUG has performed extremely well over the past 5 years, with a return of more than 90%. Next up, we have the Vanguard High Dividend Yield ETF with the symbol VYM. If you are a dividend investor, Vanguard has selected a long list of companies that have consistently provided dividends, and this might be a good investment option for you. So let's now take a look at its fees and what's actually in the ETF. For Vanguard High Dividend Yield ETF, it has an expense ratio of 0.06%, which makes it slightly higher than the S&P 500 fund. But it has a yield of 3.75%, which makes it a pretty good choice if you are after dividend investing. So let's have a look at the holdings in this particular fund. VYM has a total of 428 stocks, and most of it is distributed in the financials and consumer goods and healthcare sector. So this particular fund has less focus on technology and communications. Its top holdings include Johnson & Johnson, Procter & Gamble, and JP Morgan Chase. Let's have a look at the return of VYM over the past 5 years. So probably as expected, VYM doesn't have as much return compared to the growth ETF fund. But still, it has done reasonably well, and it has returned around 19% over the past 5 years. And this is not even including dividends that you receive. So when you invest in this particular fund, you are looking for more dividend payments. Next up, we have the Vanguard Total World Stock ETF with the symbol VT. If you own this ETF, you're basically holding a part of all of the major companies in the world. And this includes the developed markets and also the emerging markets. So let's have a look at the fees and what's actually in this ETF. The Vanguard Total World Stock ETF has an expense ratio of 0.08%, and it has a dividend yield of 2.17%. So it gives off a decent amount of dividends. So let's have a look at what the holdings of VT is. So for VT, because it's a total world ETF, we can have a look at the distribution of different regions. So a majority of it is still in North America, and followed by Europe and emerging markets and the Pacific. Let's see how VT has done over the past 5 years. So VT, in the past 5 years, it has grown by around 27%, which is not as good as the S&P 500 fund or the growth fund, but it's slightly better than the Vanguard Dividend Fund. Last but not least, we have the Vanguard Total Bond Market ETF with the symbol BND. This ETF gives you exposure to the investment-grade US bond market. Bonds are essentially a loan from the government or corporations, and they tend to be a more stable investment when compared to stocks, which tend to be more volatile. This is a good option if you're looking for a more stable investment, whether you are close to retirement or looking to buy a house in the near future. And it also helps to diversify your portfolio to reduce your risk. Let's now have a look at the fees and what's actually in the ETF. Finally, we have the Vanguard Total Bond Market ETF, and it's got an expense ratio of 0.03%, so it's a very low expense ratio. And it's got a dividend yield of around 2.5%. Now let's have a look at what holdings the bond ETF has. The Total Bond Market ETF has more than 9,000 different bonds in it, and the majority of the distribution is with Treasury, government, and industrial bonds. Now let's have a look at the charts for the bond market ETF, BND, over the past 5 years. So over the past 5 years, the bond has not actually grown that much, so it has only grown by about 8%. But what we're really after is all those dividend payments from the bond. So it has been given out a fairly consistent amount of dividends. So these are 5 of the best Vanguard ETFs that they currently have on offer. And you should be able to find them in your favorite stockbroker platform. So be sure to check them out. And I'll see you in the next video.